Hey guys, today we're going to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart because I've seen it affect so many people in a negative way. And that's something called imposter syndrome. Now, this is something that's related to Dunning-Kruger syndrome, which is a psychological principle. We'll talk a little bit more about both of those. But more importantly, we're going to talk about how to overcome imposter syndrome as well. So in a nutshell, imposter syndrome happens when you start to dismiss or discount the knowledge that you have. You feel like you're not actually an expert and everybody else knows more than you. And eventually one day, everyone's going to catch on and you're going to get caught. Now, where this ties in with the Dunning-Kruger effect is when you first start learning about a particular thing, right? You're brand new to your industry. You're learning the ropes, learning how everything works, learning who's who. In the very beginning, you know that you don't know shit. As time goes on, you start to learn, and generally speaking, you start to learn a lot pretty quickly in a relative sense, but you still don't know much. But because you went from almost no knowledge to a lot of knowledge by your perspective, you start to think that you know a lot more than you do. Now, this is where dumb people tend to have the biggest problem, because if you're not smart, you generally get to that point and you go through life just thinking you know it all. But the people who develop a really deep knowledge of their industry, of their trade, the more that they learn, the more that they realize how little they knew when they thought that they knew a lot. And that starts to cause them to doubt themselves, right? Oh, well, I thought I was an expert. Now I've learned all this new stuff. So apparently I didn't know shit back then. And then they start to think that, well, that same thing applies now. I know all this stuff. I've learned so much, but I probably don't know anywhere near as much as I think. And maybe I'm not actually qualified, right? That's the thought process that goes on. So the good news is, if you have imposter syndrome, which a lot of us do, it means you're actually intelligent. Because if you were an idiot, you would never doubt yourself. You would never question yourself. You would just think, oh, I know all this stuff. And you would never think about all the stuff you don't know. So if you are struggling with this, just take some solace in the fact that it actually means you're intelligent. It doesn't mean that you're the best in the world or that you're the smartest person in your industry, but it is a good sign that you are intelligent, you are self-aware, and you do realize that you don't know everything. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to overcome this, because it is a big challenge and it will affect all of your public relations efforts. Because if you don't feel like you're an expert, you're not going to come off as an expert. And that makes journalists a little, we'll say, concerned, right? They're less likely to feature you if they don't get a sense of confidence. The other side of it is it's going to limit what you do in your business in general. So if you doubt yourself, you're going to be less likely to take the risks that lead to large rewards. You're going to be less likely to delve into new territory. You're going to kind of stick in that rut of what's comfortable and what's familiar. So we want to get over this as much as we can. But I also want to point out, you're never going to completely get over imposter syndrome if you are an intelligent human being. So this is a thing that you manage. It's not a thing that you cure. So one of the first ways that I have found to be incredibly effective at getting over imposter syndrome is getting outside of your bubble. So when you're surrounded by people in your industry, you're surrounded by expertise. And this really distorts your perspective. If everybody knows what you know, it just seems like you don't know shit. But when you get around people outside of your industry, you start to realize how much you know compared to everybody else. And this is something that I learned a long time ago when, I was great at what I did. This was back when I ran a full service digital marketing firm. I was great at what I did. I knew a ton. I was very deep in SEO, web design, paid ads, pretty much across the board. I had a very deep level of knowledge, but I just took that for granted because the people I associated with, they all knew a lot of this stuff too. But when I started getting out into some networking groups and some entrepreneurial organizations, or going to speak on stage at particular events, and I started sharing what to me seemed like fairly basic knowledge, a lot of the times people would come up after I spoke, after I shared my expertise, And they would just be over the moon elated because they just learned all this stuff and they had no idea how any of this stuff worked. And they just loved what I was sharing with them. And it was tons of valuable content. It helped them tremendously. And that showed me that no, this knowledge that I have is not knowledge that everyone has. So I find that when you get outside of your bubble in your circle and you start getting into the general entrepreneurial world and sharing what you know, you get into the world where, maybe you're talking to your potential clients, your prospects, and they don't know what you know, and you start sharing your knowledge there. That's when you really start to realize how much you actually know. And that's a really big confidence boost, but it hits you at a very deep psychological level that helps you to get over this imposter syndrome. Not completely over it, because like I said, that's always going to be there to some degree if you are intelligent, but it does help to diminish it greatly and make it far more manageable. So, getting out of the bubble is part of it, but the other part of it is teaching other people. This is great because it distills your thoughts on a topic. If I'm talking to industry peers about a particular thing, we're going to use a certain vocabulary. We're going to use industry buzzwords. We might have certain acronyms that we use, or we take certain knowledge for granted. So there's a bit of a shortcut going on in a lot of the conversations where things are just kind of taken for granted. But if you're teaching to non-experts, you have to bring it all back down to the base level. And because you're teaching, and you're teaching to people who don't have the knowledge that you have, it actually forces you to have a better understanding of what you're doing. It also teaches you how to communicate it more effectively. Now, this is how education in the military worked, always has for as long as I've been around. I know that we used to do a lot of teaching and training in the military, and I found that the more that I trained on a topic, the more effective that I got at it. Because a lot of times people will ask you questions that you've never even considered, and that can give you different perspective on things. It can spark new ideas. There's a lot of really good things that can come out of this. Now, I will tell you that the phrase, "there's no such thing as a dumb question," is absolutely bullshit. You will 100% hear some dumb questions. So you have to be prepared for that, and you have to try to not come off condescending when that happens. But ultimately, teaching other people what you know forces you to rethink how you present the information, and it makes you a better presenter, and that helps you to become more authoritative, to appear more confident, and that helps to create that authority status for you, where when you talk, when you share your insight, people take notice and they want to listen to what you say, and they want to repeat what you say, which then further bolsters that authority status. So how do we teach other people? There's a lot of ways that we can do this. Creating content is one of the easiest and most scalable ways to do it. Everything you put on social media is content. Your email newsletters are content. Articles that you publish on your own website is content. Articles that you publish elsewhere as well are content. So this is a great way to really get your thoughts out there in a distilled, clear way that demonstrates your authority, but also in the process, you are now helping to minimize imposter syndrome in your own mind. Public speaking is a great way as well. I love public speaking because I happen to be great at it. I can get up on stage and give an hour presentation with pretty much no preparation. I can just talk off the cuff, have a very smooth, very structured presentation. For some people, that's not a gift that they have. They might need a little bit more presentation. It's definitely a skill that you should have. You should develop it because it does open up a lot of opportunities for you. And when you get up on stage, again, you're building that authority status, but now you're up here in a room full of people. You've got a captive audience and you have a chance to share your knowledge, and you're doing it in a very clear, concise, and distilled way. That helps you to get over imposter syndrome as well. One-on-one conversations can be effective as well. And a lot of the times when it comes to one-on-one conversations, you'll get a lot of questions that you wouldn't get in other scenarios. On social media, somebody might be reluctant to ask a question, or if somebody's sitting in an audience, they might be reluctant to ask a question because they don't want to be seen as dumb or not knowing certain things. So they're less likely to ask in a more public setting like that. But in one-on-one conversations, they're a lot more likely to ask you questions that you wouldn't otherwise get. And that can open your mind up to new perspectives, new ways of looking at things. And it can also spark a lot of new ideas. There's been so many times when I'll be talking to somebody about a particular thing in my industry, and they'll ask a question or they'll say something, and that sparks an idea that I had never thought of, which then opens up a whole new world of possibilities in terms of the things that I can do and the things that I can make happen. So it's also making you more effective from that perspective. And then podcast interviews are another great one. If you're getting out here on a podcast interview, you're sitting down, essentially it's in a one-on-one conversation, but it's in a format that then goes out to everybody else. So you get kind of the best of both worlds. You're broadcasting your knowledge out here, you're sharing it with a large number of people, but you also have that one-on-one type of engagement. And because a podcast host is generally not worried about looking dumb, they actually want to extract as much information out of you as possible. They're going to ask you a lot of questions, in many cases, questions that you won't even get in one-on-one conversations, because they tend to be really good at interviewing people and pulling information out of them. And so you get kind of all of the benefits of both worlds. You get all the benefits that you would get standing on stage and speaking and sharing your knowledge. You also get a lot of the benefits that you get from the one-on-one conversations and many more, because it's a different type of environment. So these are all ways that you can get out here and teach others. And in doing so, you're going to help to reduce that imposter syndrome that, frankly, most intelligent people face to some degree. Some of us quite a bit, some of us not so much, but we all face it to a degree. And it does hurt you. It does affect how you're perceived, and it does limit what you're willing to get out there and do if you're doubting yourself. So I hope you guys take this advice, run with it, do everything you can to minimize imposter syndrome, because you deserve to get out there and build the business that you want and impact a larger number of people. So I hope you guys found that useful. If you did, I'd love it if you'd share this with somebody who you think can benefit from it. And I'd love if you'd drop some questions or comments in the comments below. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you on the next video.